I realized my marriage was dead the night I caught myself staring at another man's hands. The terrifying part wasn't the guilt, but who those hands belonged to. I was 29, desperately aching for a child, and falling into a silent, forbidden gravity with the only person in this house who actually saw me, my husband's father. I'd been married to Ethan for 3 years. 3 years isn't a lifetime, but it's more than enough time to figure out exactly who you're sharing a bed with. Ethan wasn't abusive. He didn't drink, he didn't gamble, and he didn't yell. He just wasn't there. Every night I'd talk to the back of his head while the blue light of his dual monitors washed over the bedroom walls. I'd tell him about my day. He'd give a muted, uh-huh, through his noise-canceling headphones. I'd mention the neighbor's kids. Another, uh-huh. I was a ghost in my own marriage. But my father-in-law, Arthur, was different. Arthur was 52, a retired contractor with broad shoulders, a quiet demeanor, and hands calloused from decades of hard labor. He lived in the guest suite of our large Seattle home, having moved in after his wife passed away. Arthur didn't give unsolicited advice, he didn't preach, but I started noticing him in the afternoons when Lily, the 5-year-old from next door, would run across our lawn. Her mom was an ER nurse who worked brutal evening shifts, and Arthur had naturally become the neighborhood grandfather. I watched them from the kitchen window. I watched the way Arthur would crouch down to Lily's eye level, the way he'd wipe the sweat off her forehead with the sleeve of his faded flannel shirt, the way he patiently listened to her rambling, disjointed stories about kindergarten. He was gentle, so unbelievably gentle, far gentler than anything I had ever experienced as a wife. One afternoon, I watched him teach Lily how to tie her little red Converses. His large, rough hands moved slowly, without an ounce of frustration. Suddenly, my vision blurred, my chest tightened. I pictured my own child sitting on those porch steps, and the thought made my heart hammer against my ribs. I was terrified of my own mind. The shift happened on a Tuesday night. A relentless Pacific Northwest storm was battering the windows. Ethan was locked in his office, as usual. Lily's mom had texted, begging us to watch the girl for an hour because Lily was running a fever and the babysitter was late. I was in the kitchen, frantically looking for children's Tylenol, when Arthur walked in. He scooped Lily up effortlessly, pressing her tiny, feverish body against his chest. I stood close to them, close enough to smell the damp rain on Arthur's jacket, mixed with the faint scent of sawdust and Old Spice. It was a deeply grounding, masculine smell. "Shh, it's okay, kiddo. I've got you," Arthur murmured, rocking her. I don't know how long I stood there, but I felt something inside me completely shatter. When Lily finally dozed off, Arthur laid her on the sofa and looked up at me. "She reminds me of you when you first started coming around," he said quietly. I blinked, startled. "Me?" He nodded. "Small, quiet, and your eyes always looked like you were waiting for something that wasn't coming." His words bypassed every defense I had. The dam broke. "I want a baby, Arthur," I whispered, my voice trembling. I swallowed hard, unable to stop myself. "I want my child to have a real father, someone who listens, someone who holds them when they cry." I stared at the floor, terrified of what his eyes might say. The silence stretched until it was almost deafening. "Women who desperately want to be mothers," Arthur finally said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't place, "are usually the loneliest people in the world." It wasn't a platitude. It wasn't comfort. It was the raw, bleeding truth, and it made a tear slip down my cheek. We stood there, inches apart, and for the first time in years, I felt the radiating warmth of another human being. That night, lying next to Ethan's turned back, I didn't think about my husband. I thought about Arthur's calloused hands, the way he was present. I realized with a sickening drop in my stomach that I was craving the wrong man. From that night on, I lived on stolen glances. When I woke up early to brew coffee, I'd secretly watch Arthur stretching on the back patio in his white t-shirt, the morning light catching the silver in his hair. I felt like a criminal. I was a married woman nurturing a dangerous seed in her chest. But this wasn't the fiery, reckless lust of a teenager. It was a slow, quiet ache, like rain seeping into dry earth. A month later, I caught a nasty flu. My body ached, and I was shivering on the living room sofa. Ethan texted me from the office. "Take some NyQuil. Might sleep in the guest room so I don't catch it." Around midnight, I heard heavy, slow footsteps. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart racing. "Hannah?" Arthur whispered. I didn't move. I felt the sofa dip. Then a large, warm hand rested gently against my forehead. "Slight fever," he muttered to himself. He draped a cool, damp washcloth over my brow and pulled the fleece blanket up to my chin. I barely breathed. I knew that if I opened my eyes, if I turned my face even an inch toward his palm, every boundary we had would disintegrate. He stayed there for a long time before quietly walking away. The next morning, I woke up to a glass of water, a bottle of Advil, and a yellow Post-it note on the coffee table. "Eat something before you take these. The whole house falls apart when you're sick." I laughed, but the sound turned into a sob. In 3 years of marriage, Ethan had never once checked my temperature. I needed a man who remembered to touch my forehead. The tension finally snapped during a massive power outage. A fallen tree took out the grid for our entire neighborhood. Ethan had gone to a tech conference in Austin, leaving just me and Arthur in the house. The summer night was sweltering. I went out to the back porch to catch a breeze, and Arthur was already there, a flashlight resting on the table between us. "Reminds me of when I was broke in my 20s, Arthur said, staring out into the dark yard. "Power used to get shut off all the time. I'd sit up all night fanning my wife with a piece of cardboard so she could sleep." I laughed softly. "You spoiled her." He shook his head. "It wasn't spoiling. When you love someone, you just do it. If a woman stays up all night sweating, she's miserable the next day. Who wants that?" A lump formed in my throat. "There aren't many men left who love their wives like that, Arthur." Arthur went dead silent. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "That's because I'm old, Hannah, and I don't have anyone left to love." I turned my face away to hide my eyes. I knew he wasn't just talking about his late wife. He saw right through me. We sat in the dark, listening to the crickets. God, I wanted to rest my head on his shoulder, just for a second, just to feel tethered to the earth. But I didn't. The breaking point came a week later. I was cleaning out the attic, carrying a heavy box of Ethan's old childhood toys. The stairs were steep. My foot slipped. I braced for the fall, but Arthur was right behind me. He dropped the box he was carrying and caught me, his arms wrapping firmly around my waist. The box of toys crashed down the stairs, but neither of us looked at it. My back was pressed flush against his chest. I could feel the heavy, rapid thud of his heartbeat through his shirt. Neither of us moved. The air in the narrow stairwell grew impossibly thick. "You're okay," he rasped, his breath ghosting over the shell of my ear. "Arthur," I breathed out. It was a plea. For what? I didn't know. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned me around. The dim light from the attic window cast shadows across his face. His eyes were dark, searching mine. He lifted a hand, his thumb brushing the trembling line of my jaw. "If things were different," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They're not," I choked out, tears spilling over my lashes. He closed his eyes, dropping his hand like I had burned him. "I'm sorry. God, Hannah, I'm so sorry." He took a step back, the distance between us suddenly feeling like a canyon. For the next 2 weeks, we lived like ghosts. We avoided each other. He stopped sitting on the porch. I stayed in my bedroom. But the absence only made the craving worse. I realized the cruelest truth of all. If Arthur hadn't been in this house, my soul would have withered and died years ago. One evening, Ethan actually came home early, but he didn't come to me. He went straight to the kitchen, poured a drink, and booted up his laptop. I stood in the doorway, staring at the stranger I had married. "Ethan," I said, "do you ever think about having kids?" He didn't even look away from his screen. "Eventually, not right now. Market's too volatile. We'll talk about it next year." I nodded slowly. The clarity hit me like a freight train. There would always be a reason to wait. He was never going to wake up and suddenly see me. I walked upstairs, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and started packing. I didn't leave a dramatic, screaming mess. I wrote a simple note and left it on Ethan's keyboard. "I'm empty, Ethan. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to stay in the city for a while. We need to talk to a lawyer." As I walked down the hallway, I stopped in front of Arthur's door. It was slightly ajar. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, his hands clasped together. I didn't go in. I couldn't. Instead, I slid a small, folded piece of paper under his door. "I'm leaving to find myself. If I'm brave enough, one day I'll come back." I rented a tiny apartment in a different part of the city. I filed for divorce. Ethan predictably treated it like a business transaction. He didn't fight me. Within 6 months, he took a promotion in Silicon Valley and moved to California. During that time, I learned how to be alone. I got a job at a local bookstore. I went to therapy. I learned what it felt like to breathe without the suffocating weight of an empty marriage. Occasionally, my phone would buzz. "Freeze warning tonight. Leave your faucets dripping. Arthur." "Saw they opened a new bakery down your street. Eat something besides cereal. Arthur." I would cry reading those texts, not out of sadness, but because someone out there was quietly making sure I survived. A year after I left, I drove back to the old house. Ethan had transferred the deed to Arthur and me as part of the settlement. I parked in the driveway and killed the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Arthur was on the front porch. He was fixing a broken hinge on the screen door. He looked older, but when he heard my car doors shut, he stopped. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at me. There was no grand cinematic run into his arms. There didn't need to be. I walked up the steps. The air smelled like impending rain and old pine. "You fixed the door," I said softly. "Took long enough," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked at my face, really looked at me, and let out a long, shaky breath. "You look good, Hannah. You look alive." I stepped forward and closed the gap. I rested my head against his chest. He didn't hesitate this time. His thick, warm arms wrapped around me, pulling me in tight, grounding me to the earth. We never put a label on what we were. Society wouldn't have a word for it anyway. We just shared the house. We drank coffee in the mornings. We sat on the porch during thunderstorms. I didn't know if I was right or wrong in the eyes of the world, only knew that I had finally found the one place I was meant to be. Sometimes happiness isn't about crossing a finish line with the perfect title. Sometimes it's just about finding the courage to stay exactly where you feel safe.